these were moments where God was just really close to us, and we got just a glimpse of something bigger than ourselves, and it rocked our world. Like, it was just a glimpse, and it was still all we could handle. My name is Kendall McKee. I moved to Wilmore when I was 22 years old, going to Asbury Theological Seminary from Texas. And when we moved here, you couldn't have convinced me that I was ever going to live outside of Texas. And then we went to this little small town in Kentucky and felt like God really called us to stay here. And so my wife and I graduated from the seminary in 2019 and have just been working and doing ministry in the area, working with churches, and now I'm the college pastor at First Alliance Church in Lexington with most of our students here at Asbury. And so I'm re-entering the Asbury network and just get the privilege to be with some of these great students.
Well, lead us up into however far back you want to go.
Sure.
Up into the revival.
I did go to school here in Wilmore, across the street at the seminary. For those of you guys that aren't aware, the university and the seminary are two different institutions, but in the same city. So this small little town has two giant faith communities that largely just run separately, which is kind of unique and creates a unique community as well here. So I did go to the seminary, and then I worked at Asbury as well, the university. In my time in my grad school, I was a college basketball coach for a little bit. I worked with the men's program underneath Coach Schaus here as the chaplain and as an assistant coach for the men's team here. So I have a little bit of a history with working with Asbury College students and discipling them and praying with them and things. And having a real pulse to the community is kind of where I would articulate that to be. But as I moved to Lexington, which is about 13 miles north, and it's a larger community that Wilmore is kind of a suburb of, I began to just do regular church ministry in Lexington and kind of left Wilmore kind of behind. I don't know how to explain that, but I just moved out of Wilmore and just was like, okay, Asbury was there for a season. And then as I started working in churches again, I got the opportunity to be in college ministry role, and they said, okay, well, 90% of our students are from Asbury. Do you know anything about that school? And I was like, I know a little bit about it, but I was able to come forward with a knowledge or a pulse, like I was saying, on the demographic and the struggles and kind of the things that the students are really going through and knowing what that was like. So that's been really cool. Then I'll jump forward to in January. So January, there was a group of us that are from a conference we're trying to put on in May. It's called the Awakening Project, and it's basically trying to create is actually not the best word, but kind of facilitate this movement of God that we believe is happening in the hearts of Gen Z. So that would include the college people and the young professionals at this point. And we are putting a conference on, and it happens to be at Asbury this May. So in January, our leadership team met in this room, and we were praying towards what May would look like. And it's just pastors and leaders that were getting together and really tarry and have prayer times that was really meaning something, not just like, okay, God, would you doing something, but like travailing prayer of really like face to the ground saying, God, we're wanting this city and these students to just fall on their face before you. And we began to pray, and we felt like God was telling us there's going to be something special. We just thought it was going to happen in May. And he said, well, why don't we just do something in February and in March? And so that was kind of fun to be able to be in a room together with a bunch of leaders in January on our face, just praying for multiple hours and for really long period, more than that, but actually in this space in January. And then to see that happen in February. And then to hear that there's other organizations that had been praying at the same time and for years to come, and you hear testimonies of students long ago that have been praying for Asbury's revival, from that it would kind of have a new, fresh revival from all the previous famous revivals that are at this school. For they wanted something new. They wanted something fresh in the hearts of this generation. And so it's been really amazing to watch, and I really just can't make enough of Jesus. Like, this event has been really special, and there are stories that are going to grab your attention and stuff, but don't miss out the fact that the special part is Jesus in this. The special part is that we were just facilitators, and we wanted God to move, and we were expecting him to move. And God wants to move, even in, whoever's watching this, in your culture or in your setting. God wants to move in your setting too. Are you on your face asking God to do it through you? Is what I would say. So that Awakening Project is still happening in May, and I don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe we'll just do a round 2,
Yeah,
we'll just do it again.
That's what I was just thinking, I kind of want to be here for that.
Hey, man, you're welcome.
Man, come
You're
back.
welcome to come back. So it'll be at the end of May. So anyway.
Yeah. So all of that, man, the prayer, get on your face, praying out, not knowing that you're thinking, oh, it's in May, it's all this stuff. But then February shows up.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
happened?
So I'm the college pastor. So I do a lot of work at the church, but I do a lot of work just with the students. And so I get a text from one of our students, and she's like, "Hey man, just leave work." And there was like a group text with a couple of our people that work with college pastors or college ministry people in the area. And they're like, "You guys should just leave work and come hang out at Asbury." And I was just like, oh, heck yeah. All you gave me was an excuse to come hang out with the students. They actually wanted me to be here, like I'm 30 now. So when you're desired, you just leave. So I was like, hey, are we just going to like hang out? Is there something cool happening or whatever? And she's like, oh no, this is serious. And I felt it. Like even in just a text, I was just like, God was even laying on my heart, like there's something special. And I just was like, and I was literally meeting with a friend, and it was my day off, and I was just like, I gotta go, and he was like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. That's all the information I have, but I need to be there. And so on my drive here, I just began to pray, and God had I really don't even know how to describe it, but there was like this sense that there's something special going on I want you to be a part of. And so on the way here, it took me about 30 minutes to drive here. And on my way here, I was calling all those people from that meeting in January saying, I don't know what's happening, but we need to show up. There's apparently something going on at the chapel. I've gathered some information from other people at this point. I think we need to be there. And out of the 6 people I called, 5 of them were already here. And they were like, oh yeah, we feel it too. We're totally we're either on our way in the parking lot, already at chapel. And so by the time I got there, it was about 1:45. So it was really early on. Chapel's ends at noon. So I really was some of the first people in the room, especially. And so I just walked in the back, and I didn't know about what was going on or whatever, but I walked in the back and I said, okay, I'm just going to be available for our students. I'm not going to try to facilitate anything. I'm just trying to pray and really encourage them. And I see my friend Zach at the front. And Zach Mearcreeps and I have done a lot of church planting together. We're in the same denomination. We've got many life history together. Our wives are in the same accountability group. So we go back, and he's a dear friend of mine. And I see him up there, and I was just like, oh, that's on brand. Zach's leading this thing. I'm totally all in. There is no skepticism that I have, about whatever's going on. And I was like, God was telling me that it was real. God was telling me I needed to be there. Zach was up there leading, and I was like, okay, man, I can just fully dive in here. And he ended up motioning me to come to the front, and I was like, okay. And I stood next to him, and he said, I felt this coming. We've done this chapel service, but I was praying like, God, I feel discouraged, and I feel like I need some people to come alongside me and help. And I walked in the room right as he was finishing praying that. So it's like God was answering all these different prayers, prayers from generations that the Lord would move on Asbury's campus again. Prayers of need in terms of a lack of not ownership, but a lack of encouragement and just feeling discouraged. And then all of that's happening. Prayers of students coming and laying down stuff at the altar and stuff. And it's like, you hear stories, especially in the Bible, about people were praying for one thing on one side and one thing on another, and God fulfills both prayers in one moment. And it's like he's creating this grand narrative, but it's just time after time after time for the 2 weeks we were there. It was just like people were asking prayers at the altar. They were seeing God move, and they were like, God, I want you to become real to me. I have this particular ailment or this particular problem. Move through me or move in me. And then at the altar, the people are like, God, I've had a staleness with you over the past couple of years, and I'm faithful to you and stuff, but God, would you just do something with these hands, through me that I just know is of you? And then in one moment of healing, God answered both of their prayers, and God became real to both of them, and they're both crying that God's moving in their own, it's like that kind of stuff was just happening all over the place where Jesus was just really, really great about just showing off in a way that was extremely humble and extremely kind and not showy and things like that. And I can talk a little bit more about why that part of it is important to me, but
yeah,
it's just beautiful, man. It was just so beautiful.
Yeah, and so you were up there every day, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. I quickly realized that, okay, this was something that I was being equipped to lead or to lead into. Not that I wanted to be on the stage. I never was actually. I was just there in support roles of all the other things that were happening. I actually spent most of my time in the consecration room, which was the room that was praying for the worship leaders as they would go on, and just diving in and really fighting for them in the spiritual realm and just being like, God, just protect them. There was a lot of stuff. Obviously, when the Lord's moving, there's a lot of other stuff moving as well. And there was it was the most supernatural thing I've ever been a part of on this earth. I've heard it described where these were moments where God was just really close to us, and we got just a glimpse of something bigger than ourselves, and it rocked our world. Like, it was just a glimpse, and it was still all we could handle, And there was a moment the first day where I was standing, and I was looking up at the sky, and there was like these big clouds surrounding the university, and wind was blowing towards the sanctuary on all directions. And it was like if you were on one side of the chapel, the wind was just like hitting you in the face, and it was like 50. I mean, it's like I was in Amarillo again. Yeah. It was just like blasting me, and that just doesn't happen here. And then I would be like, man, I gotta make this phone call. I gotta get on the other side of this building, and then it's just right towards you again. And there were like people on the news were talking about the weather's doing crazy things, and it was bigger than us, and it was just something that was extremely special. And now leaving it, post a couple of weeks out, I had a conversation with my wife the other night. That wasn't a moment where it was like I'd been following the Lord for years, but that was a moment where it was just like things are different now. Things have changed. There's a different breadth of seriousness in our faith walks, not only here, but like in the region. There's just something different still going on. At the time of this recording, it's Holy Week, and Easter's going to be next Sunday. And I truly expect something to happen in our city between now and Sunday, like another thing to keep going. Our churches are popping off with people just coming to faith, and there's something still very special about God, what's God doing here. And so I've just been extremely blessed to be a part of what God's doing.
Yeah. You talked about, it's kind of interesting, just things you don't think of, but it's cool to hear that you were praying for the worship leaders before they would come out and worship, and did you have worship going like all the time?
Yeah, 24/7.
24/7.
Yeah.
So you were just running them through, keeping it going.
Yeah.
Praying for them before they're going out.
Yeah.
Because you had all sorts of warfare and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then you had altar calls and people going up to altars. And were you praying for people too? Or I know there was lots of different prayer going on.
There's praying all over that room.
It was just all over the place. I've already heard stories of people just standing against the walls, getting prayed for everywhere. But I didn't know how any of that worked out.
Yeah, so I guess like another thing that would be really interesting for you guys, for the documentary for sure, would be there were systems that had to be created for this to be sustainable. You know, especially as this went viral, like people were coming from everywhere. I mean, it was like 2 days in, and people are coming from other states away. There's this super cool story, sidetrack for just a cool second, is there was these 3 kids in college up in northern Ohio, and they saw it on TikTok, and they looked down, and they were like, one of the kids was like, man, that's so crazy. And they just paused for a little bit. Like they were all just kind of struck by the craziness of like, why can't that happen here? And then one of them said, you know, if Jesus was actually there, like if Jesus had become incarnation and was actually there, would we drive there today to see it? And they were like, oh yeah, I think we would. And they were like, so why aren't we going? And they were like, all right, I guess we're going. You know, they just jumped in the car, and and that's kind of how that first movement of people coming from all over, there was like that impression of like, if Jesus was here, would we go? And they were saying, yes, we would. And they just started to come. And then it became, the atmosphere kind of changed as it became viral. Like the way I've looked at it is like their students started it, and then that first night, or that first day really, there was like those of us key leaders that are there in support of their spiritual lives, you know, our local churches, our local pastors, local student ministry stuff began to come around. But then the city started being like, we've been praying for this. The city of Wilmore had been praying that revival would happen. There's a lot of drug abuse and everything in this city, which is like, there's like this really cool moment of like the Wilmore bubble, but there's also like some really deep hurt as well here. And so the city became to be like, okay, so Thursday night you saw key leaders of the city, in the back of the room. Friday night you began to see people from Lexington come. Saturday night you saw college kids coming from all over. And it was just like, as it began to expand, God was able to use the giftings of other types of Christians to come in. And it wasn't just the people who could speak or the people who could play music. It was like the administration people were coming in and bringing organization. The people that had margin with their money we were getting trucks of deliveries from people that were buying like 70,000 water bottles from Georgia and then they were just door dashing it to the school, that hoping somebody would be able to know where it was supposed to go. You know, like I remember standing in the room that we had for our volunteers, and this kid walks in and he's like, where do we put all this? And we're like, what? And then we looked out in the hallway, and there's just like, literally there was like $2,000 worth of food somebody had catered for the leaders.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, Siri just wanted to add a little bit. But there was just all this food that of people from, that they were just like, I can't get there. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to call the nearest restaurant and order as much food as I can and just be there and support. So we had people donating water and food and pizza, and like, you know, it's just like the real stuff of like that was helping this movement keep going was another really beautiful part of it that is not getting talked about how God was using the organization of humans and the giftings of all of us to be a small part in what he was doing. And it was just so beautiful to watch.
Yeah, that whole, it's like co-laboring with God.
Yes.
Like God wants to do
Yes.
this, but he needs to feed people,
Yeah.
and they need water, and we need to figure out how to get these people in and out and all
Yeah.
these things, and not,
Yeah.
just collapse the whole building down, and all that stuff.
Yeah, like there was people working with the fire marshal, there was people working with the university to keep students engaged. We earned, like, at one point there were so many people, the students felt like they couldn't even go anymore, so we opened up another space. Then we felt like, okay, that was too much. We opened up 4 more auxiliary locations in Wilmore that they could go watch the live stream, and it was breathtaking, really.
Yeah.
But I can't say enough that it was all Jesus. Like, I can't make enough of Jesus in this moment. Like, the stories were great, people were encouraged and great and all this kind of stuff, but it would not have happened without him. So,
yeah, whatever word you want.
whatever you don't cut from this interview, don't cut. Like, it was the Lord Jesus is what this was all about. I can't make enough of him. And as we've lived on, a month now or so beyond this, like, that's the lasting impression that people have had, an encounter with the true living God, and they can't deny that this was just the most amazing thing they've ever seen in their lives. So,
Yeah, that's what I mean, that's what the takeaway should be, right?
Yeah.
You know, whatever you want to call it, outpouring, revival, awakening, all these, you know, it's a person.
Yeah. Yeah, we were meeting with, I mean, we got, from my perspective, it was the closest contact I've ever been from like, I've been a Christian for years, you know, but it's just like, there was just something deeper, more serious, like, and it was this combination of expectant hearts, true believing prayer, and then God saying like, yep, now's the time, you know, because we knew something was happening. The Christians in the area were like, something big is about to happen. I mean, I remember in December and January when we were at the, like doing stuff with the Awakening Project, people were like, wow, God is doing fixing to do something. And we just had this expectant heart towards like, God's going to move. We didn't know it was going to be a viral, you know, hundreds of thousands of people coming to Asbury.
Like you said, it's also kind of the time that we live in is also really interesting how it used to play in. Because, you know, you look about, I mean, Asbury itself has had a total of like 8 or 9, you know, these outpourings and whatnot. But in 1950, it was the most well-reported on article of the year. And then in 1970, you know, it was on the news and all these things. But now, I mean, and this did get on the news too. I saw, you know, Fox News talking about it, you know, and you're like, wow, this is crazy. And people who aren't even Christians looking at it going, I don't know what this is, but it looks cool, you know. You know, I got Ben Shapiro, who's not even, you know, Christian. He's going, well, this looks good. I'm glad, you know. And it's like, this is so interesting. But then, like, in the social media age, I mean, I couldn't get on TikTok without every single day some new video. And I loved it that, you know, we're getting on this secular platform and it's just covered in people sharing stories and just talking about God. And, you know, it's an interesting time to be alive that it has its downfalls for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of all the same time. It's like, I don't know if you would have gotten so bombarded, run over by just people if it wasn't for social media. So there's good and bad in that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's this whole thing of we can share what God is doing more easy now than ever before. And people can hear, and hungry people go, I want it. And I think like that's a pretty cool tool.
Right.
You know,
the Lord can redeem anything, right? And so it's this tool that so many people have bashed, and you know, so many people have, you know, there's even lawsuits, you know, all this stuff, and you couldn't turn it on without your algorithm going straight towards this is crazy, you know, like check this out, you know, like and it was special, you know, for those of us that were here. We were working so dang hard, you know. It was just like we were putting in. I called it like we were the Black Hawk Down of like, you know, it's just like you're awake until you can't stand anymore. You sleep, you come back, and you go right back in it, you know. And there was a toll that it took on the leadership of like God was calling us to serve into a moment, and like this was a moment we knew, but we were toast, you know, like it was really truly hard. But we didn't know all that stuff that was going on. You know, we were learning about stuff that had happened at the revival from people coming and being like, oh, did you see this happen? And we were like, no, we did not. But that's great. You know, it probably happened, you know, a couple of prayer circles away from me, you know, like it was just amazing to know that God was in control of it. And there was all these hearts of believers were coming together to just pursue one goal, and that's to reach this next generation for faith, you know, like they were the most unchurched generation as of, you know, a couple months ago. And we've had, you know, thousands of them come to faith. And not only is it spread, or not only was it here, but it's spread to other campuses. You know, we've got Baylor and Texas A&M in our home state that we're just having radical nights of prayer. And we've had other congregations that have spread, like there are a couple of students from other universities that didn't have the ability to get here. So they're like, we'll just start praying on our campus. And then it popped off there, you know, and it was just like, I really believe this is how God's going to move in this next generation. And so, and we've been praying for that too, so.
Yeah, you talked about it a little bit, but I think it's important to emphasize because maybe people don't think about the utter toll that it took on, the leaders and the administration of just exhaustion. But like you shared, it's you're tired, you're exhausted, you go in there, Spirit of God's in that place, fired
Yes.
up, and then you just go, and then, but you have to come off of it eventually.
I know, yeah. There were moments where we were just like, tag in, like please somebody, and we were like around the clock for a lot of the time, just tagging in people for. I was particularly fond of the 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift. That was my favorite shift because it was like it slowed down, and that's when it was like less about the cameras and less about the spectacle, everybody coming to be like, oh, what's going on, and more just like people hungry at the altar of like needing prayer or wanting to just see Jesus, and that was just something really special. But there was this moment where I believe it was Steve Siemens was talking about on a podcast about revival. He was here. He's a professor at Asbury. It's a seminary, and he was here during the '70s revival as well. So, and his grandson is here as a student at Asbury. So it's just like, it was so cool to see them sitting next to each other in the revival. Like that was something special for me.
Multi-generational.
Most multi-generational Asbury Hughes Auditorium revivalists, But he was saying that revival is beautiful, but also it is, I forget his exact words, but he was saying it's incredible and also crushing for those of you that are leading it, because the leaders are pouring everything they have out. And if you're not tethered to the Spirit, you're just going to burn out so quickly. And it was funny, like you kind of spoke about it, but we would go home and we would sleep at night and we would just hit the sheets, and it was just like the best rest you've ever had in your life. And then you get up the next morning and there was kind of this part in you that was just like, oh, I don't want to go back. Like, oh, like there's like this humanness side of you that was just like, I'm tired, like surely somebody else can do it. But you just knew that it was important, and you strapped your shoes on, and as soon as you hit that auditorium, it was just like, okay, God, I feel it, and I feel you, you really needing me to put my hand to the plow here, and be able to facilitate for all these people to see the face of Jesus, and it just nothing else was as important. Like I'm a big sports guy, and I have other jobs that, like, I'm a big entrepreneur as well, and I have other stuff, and it was just like that stuff just wasn't important anymore. Like I was going throughout the week, and it was just like, oh, you're gonna miss this, or hey, do you need to? Nah, dude, nothing is more special than being here with Jesus. So, and just, I know we've got some testimonies on this of some of my students. And it was just amazing to stand next to them and say, like, see real breakthrough in some of their lives. So,
yeah, get to watch the very people that you
yeah,
love and pour into,
yeah,
and then watch them have an encounter with Jesus.
yeah. There was just some incredible moments, and confession was a big part of it. Like it started with a lot of students just confessing publicly. One of the most powerful confessions is I remember a girl stood up, and you could tell she didn't have a whole lot of confidence in what she was about to say. And she was kind of running around some things, and she was bouncing back and forth about like just being a little unsure. And then you could feel like she just had this moment where it was just like, okay, I just have to let it out. And she goes, I walk around this campus like a ghost. No one knows me. And it was just like, then all these people were just like, hey, we know you, we see you, we're praying for you. And it's just like people, like students, other students standing up and just like began to hug and like just have this moment of like authenticity of saying like, we're in this together. And then a couple hours later, you see her dancing on the stage in worship, like unabandoned with the Lord. And it was just like, whew, like that was, as somebody whose job it is to pray for these students and to pray that their lives are impacted by Jesus, to see stuff like that, for somebody to say like, I'm really hurting, and have an authentic response from others, like that's Jesus. Mm-hmm. That is Jesus, Yeah. And so, and I think that for me, that set the tone of me every day coming and just saying like, God, I want to be as truthful and honest with you as that girl was with her peers. You know, I want to have my heart just tore open in front of you saying, whatever's in me that's not of you, just take it away. You know, like let you be more important to me than all these other things in life. Yeah.
You'll never be able to, it's like, you know, the Bible, you know, where it says that if you recorded all the miracles that he did, that no book could contain it. That's what it feels like.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like what we're saying right now and what we're talking about is like little bitty sliver.
Yeah.
Little bitty sliver. This is not conclusive or anything like that. It's just like one little sliver, and that one little sliver may be monumental for somebody else. But it's just amazing. Hearing all the stories, I'm just like, wow.
The beautiful part is that little sliver meant everything to somebody.
Yeah.
You know, like that little sliver of all eternity changed somebody's eternity. You know, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
That's my calling in life, is just those small moments that change people's eternity. You know.
Yeah.
So
That was all those small moments. You know, we see these small moments and they're big sparks, and we're like, "Oh, those are awesome!" But it's like, I look and I see the backlog of all the prayer and the sacrifice and the getting low and the dying and all of that.
Yeah.
And we go, you know, all right, if you want that sliver, if you want that, that'll only take a moment, but all this happens.
Yeah. So people have asked us, you know, like, what do we got to do to get our students that hungry? And I'm like, oh, our students were not hungry, you know, like 3 months ago. You know, it's just like, but there was just this moment where it became real, you know, and it was just like, whoa, you know, like, we cannot avoid this. And I think there was enough hungry people praying. And so how to replicate this? Like, you can't recreate it. God never healed blindness the same way in Scripture. God's not going to redo Hughes somewhere else. He's going to use the hearts of believers to contextually be apparent for what they're doing in their own culture. Like, God is a strategic God. I love to say, like, he's the greatest anthropologist we've ever seen. Jesus is the best anthropologist we've ever seen. Anthropology is the study of culture, society, and its development. Jesus does that better than anyone I've ever known. And missiology, which is the study of missions, so missiologically speaking, this revival was exactly what the generation needed. He didn't move in power. He didn't like have all these crazy lights and smoke or whatever. This generation, the way that they were going to have their heart heard is they were going to know that they were loved, and this was real, and it was authentic, like peaceful making, radical humility. That's what captured this generation. And I'm not sure it'll capture the next. I'm sure it will, but like what will set on fire the next generation is at the true heart of that generation. God will move in that way. And so it's just like, we couldn't have recreated what had happened in the past, but we can pray towards what will happen in the future. And so that's been something that I've just been journaling like crazy. And who knows, maybe a book will come out of that for me about how Jesus and anthropology and missiology have just changed the game. So anyway.
Yeah, you said I remember when we talked before about how strategic God is. You know, like the very timing of this and how the last day ended and all of that.
Yes,
you know,
that was so cool.
Share that.
So the National Collegiate Day of Prayer is something that's been going on for over 200 years. And it was an organization that has bbeen taking time for the last 200 years. Like 200 years, when you say it, it's like, okay, cool. You give a date and you're like, you know, was the Mayflower there? No, it's just like, I know that's a joke, but it's so long ago. And people were praying at that point. And when they talk, so the National Collegiate Day of Prayer was scheduled over a year ago to happen here on Asbury's campus to honor some of the stuff that had happened previously in like the 70s at Asbury. And that was the crescendo of the event here. The revival was just like, we were just like, when is this going to end? We were looking at the calendar. It's like, oh, the Collegiate Day of Prayer is actually in 2 weeks, maybe, you know, which is already a national spectacle designed, like it's going to be for Asbury. Maybe God's going to hold us out that long. and that was like the first day. And this is like, after 2 weeks, we're sitting there at the Collegiate Day of Prayer, and they're talking about how 200 years ago, they were praying for this generation to know Jesus. And I was struck by that. How do you have enough vision as a human to have 200 years ago be praying for something you have no idea what the context looks like? And so that struck me about the strategy of the Lord. Like, we serve a God that is quick and moves in power and sometimes doesn't move with structure, but we also serve a God of structure and of strategy and of like development and risk taking. Like, those are elements of God that I've seen over the last couple of months. And when I was on my knees in that prayer service, I was challenged to pray for the next 200 years. And God just gave me some vision of like what that was potentially going to look like. And I was just like, that is not the same of what I'm experiencing. I'm going to be long gone by then. This documentary might be all that's left by then. But I hope 200 years from now, there are people that know that we cared for you enough to tarry on your behalf, that we would stand in the gap for you, and all in between, because people had stood in the gap for us. It reminds me of a quote of like, what's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, so people can enjoy it. But what's the next best time to plant a tree? Today, so that in 20 years, somebody can sit in the shade. And I want to plant a tree spiritually so that in 200 years, people can stand in the shade. And maybe I'm not the author of creation. I don't know about time and all that, but maybe my prayer will break a chain 200 years from now, that helps somebody come to a realization that God is real.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that. When we were driving up here, I was talking to Benji. I told him the story, and I tell it all the time because it's impacted me so much. And it's about that I think it's in the 80s. There's an article about it, that a GM executive went to a Toyota conference, right? So you've got GM manufacturer Toyota, and he goes to Japan, and he goes to this Toyota conference. It's supposed to be about all week long because, check out what the competition's doing, what they're planning. He gets there, and the first day, and the first session they have is all about the 100-year vision of Toyota. And he listens to all of their plans and all their stuff, and he goes, okay. And he turns around, and he gets back on an airplane and just leaves. Flies back home, and when he gets home early, they're like, why'd you come back? He says, because I heard all I needed to hear. He says, we've already lost. He says, they're creating a legacy, and they're planning for 100 years. He says, we're just trying to figure out how to make next year's car. And for me, I hear that, and I go, like what you were saying. Yeah. And I love your, like, okay, if Toyota can plan for 100 years, then Christians should plan
for 200
years, right?
Yeah.
And I think the fault is that we don't have that vision. We're not going. We're just trying to work on us and our own lives. But the question is, man, what about 200 years from now? Because prayers don't expire when it's something like that. Just look at the Old Testament of what God was doing over generations.
Yeah.
And so when you said that, I'm like, yeah, what is, and I don't want to get into eschatology or any of those things, but I have a beef to pick with people that are like, Jesus is coming back tomorrow. And so they don't plan for 200 years.
Yeah.
And I've looked at my parents' generation, and we've had conversations with them, and I said, you guys thought Jesus was coming back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and all this stuff, right? And you had all your books and your dates. He's coming back and all these things. And you didn't pray for the next generation because you thought you wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm ready whenever, but
I'm going to make sure that next generation's prayed up.
Yeah. What are we going to do for the next 200 years?
Yeah. And that's a special calling.
Yeah.
I think with what you're saying, I think it takes our special perspective for us to see. It's an unselfish perspective, mm-hmm. because so many things you could pray for are right in front of you. Things like, what am I going to eat today? Is my family going to be safe? All this kind of stuff. Or, God, would you just bless like me to get this raise because, I could really use a couple more $1,000s to make it through inflation or whatever, but are we praying for the next generation? I know that I'm standing on the shoulders of prayers from generations ago. Like I have some friends that are saying like, I'm only here because my grandma's a praying grandma, and I believe it.
Yeah.
Especially with some of my friends. But I want to be a praying grandfather.
Yeah.
I want to be a grandfather of faith to people that believes in them without even knowing them, because I know that they can hear from the same God I can hear from.
Yeah.
They have an authentic faith with Jesus, and they don't need me to approve of that, but I want to support it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the heart of it. That's what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
As I look at my daughter, I've got a 1.5-year-old right now, and I go, I don't want you to start over. I want you to pick up where I leave.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Go higher, go farther, go more than I ever went. Mm-hmm. Go glory unto glory, Because I've seen too many generations have to pick up.
Yeah.
Start over. And I'm going, I don't think that's God's plan.
Yeah, we have this mentality. It's like, man, I just wish I could be half the man you were.
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, I want you to be double the man I am.
Yeah. Yeah, go be greater than I ever could be.
Break my records. From a sports perspective, records are always meant to be broken. Yeah. Break my records and how much you've prayed or whatever. I don't like to think about it like that. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying. It's coming from a joyous heart of like, love Jesus more than I do, for sure. I told somebody the other day, I want to love Jesus more than anyone else in my family ever has. And I want my kids to love Jesus more than anyone else in their family ever has. And so on and so on.
Yeah.
Like, what if we just created a posture of generational Jesus lovers?
Yeah.
If the McKee family line goes on and all we're known for is we love Jesus, great. I'm all in.
Yeah. Let's pray.
Let's do it.
So would you end us in prayer?
Yeah. Father, you're special. You're different than everything else I know. And God, I don't know it all, but I just want to trust you with it. God, with what my life is, would I put it in your hands? And then would you be proud at the end? Lord, I pray that you would bring the hearts of believers to watch this. God, for a culture back home in Texas that is sometimes apathetic, sometimes just stuck, God, would this shake them? Would this shake us from our core? God, would there be fresh revelation that you'd have on the other side of this? Would you use our words and our testimonies to defeat to defeat evil? Revelations 12:11 talks about we defeat evil by the blood of our Lamb, by the blood of the Lamb, and by the words of our testimonies. God, would these stories begin to break down walls? God, would you move in a way that only you can? Lord, would we have enough presence to pray for the next generation? Thank you for letting us be involved in all this, man.